on this computer. There we go. Well, we're gonna jump in because we got a long way to go today. But just want to welcome you, whether you're on with us or maybe you're watching this after the fact. That's so awesome. We appreciate you guys being here. We got some newbies today, but as always, we're hopeful just to give you guys some great content as you lead your churches and your teams all over the place. And we've got some great content today. I'm going to set it up here in just a moment. But as always, our Growmentum team is going to be in the chat. So feel free to unmute and interrupt. I know most of you are too polite to do that, but we always invite you to do that. We don't want it to just be a one-way conversation. So as we go through, especially the content today, if there's things that you want to get clarity on, you can use either the chat or just unmute and be a crazy man and do that. So I'm only going to just tee this up, and then I'm going to hand it off to Kay, and he's going to introduce Alex. And I think it's going to be really good. Before we do that, let me talk to you guys real quick about, and curiously, a bunch of you guys have texts, so you're starting to think about the fall. But our Think Tank Live, that will be our fourth one. We are about ready in the next week to 10 days to roll out the registration for that. So Kay will put a number on the screen. This will also go out in the deck. But what we want to do for you guys today is Think Tank Live. Basically, for those of you that haven't had a chance, it's just a great combination of content, reflection, and just replenishment relationships for you guys. You guys all have conferences and seminars that you go to. We want this to just be slightly different, where it's just a chance for you guys that see each other on the call. Maybe you have relationships outside where you're texting each other to come to Vegas to spend some time together. October 23rd, it kicks off on Wednesday night. This year, we're going to change our format a little bit. Wednesday night, we're actually going to have a gathering where we spend some time really worshiping together, kind of spending some time doing some kind of just bonding together over a good meal. And then Thursday will be our content day. And Thursday night will be our classy dinner that we do every year just to spoil you guys and to have you come and be part of it. So anyway, I'll shut up, but there's the number. It's our Growmentum number. If you text that TTL, we're going to give you a pre-discount code when that goes live for registration. We're pretty excited. So real quick, we got a bunch of speakers that are coming. Three that we want to highlight today are Steve Cuss. Many of you may know Steve. He does some amazing, former pastor, does some amazing stuff around anxiety, leadership anxiety, and how do you work through some of that. If you've dealt with anxiety, if you're dealing with it right now, raise your hand. Steve's done some great work. He's going to be here. James Robertson, who's a great friend of ours at Growmentum. He pastors an awesome church that Kay and I have been at in Brooklyn. He's just a great dude. And so we were pumped to be able to have him. He's part of Strategic Launch Network. And then we're also going to have a couple younger emerging leaders that you maybe haven't heard from, including one Ruby, who you see there on the screen, who we're going to talk to us a little bit about how do we make room for some of these emerging leaders and give them space to grow and do all that stuff. And then we got a couple other people that are going to be part of it. Anyway, long story short, hopefully you've already marked the dates, but now's the time if you want to get a little discount. Hit us with that registration for you and anybody on your team. Just so you guys know, it's really, I want to be careful here. It's really upper tier decision maker leadership that this is geared for. Think Tank Live. It's not necessarily geared for you to bring your team of 10. It's not that kind of a deal. But if it's your executive pastor, maybe you have an executive team, it would be completely, I know Rob brought his executive team last year. So if you've done that, it would be a completely appropriate content and mingling for that. So feel free to do that. Okay, cool. If you have questions, you can throw it in there. I'm going to throw it to Kay. And listen, today we're going to deep dive. Many of us, we've heard post-Easter, people, a lot of momentum, a lot of real interest that it feels like just culturally, and people stepping back into church or stepping into church, all of that sort of thing. But that also means that as our attendance increases and as growth starts to come back, that the need and the intentionality around resourcing, specifically in the area of finance, needs to be there. As we've encouraged a lot of you, all of you, to, what's your 10-year vision? What's the direction you're going? we need finance and resources to do that. So, Kay, I'm going to throw it to you. We're going to spend the rest of our 45 minutes together really talking to some strategies. Some of it will be reminders for some of you, and some of it will be new content for you as you get your mind around that. So, Kay Chung, slow clap, everybody. Slow clap. There we go.
Oh yeah, golf clap. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, great. Thanks for that setup there. I want to introduce Alex there. Alex Australia there you see in that box. He is a part of our Growmentum team. So if you're a client of Growmentum, you probably have interfaced with him with invoices and those type of things. So he's part of our team, and he does way more than that. But he's a huge part of what we do here at Growmentum. But the other part that he does, and the other hat that he wears, is he's the finance manager at Crossing in Vegas. And so he is so sharp in so many different levels and very articulate. And so it's awesome that we have him a part of our Growmentum team. And he's just a partner with me as I play a lot of the remote and fractional CFO roles with different churches. And so that so he's going to be a value add here today and speaking a little bit about from his perspective, as well as the different conversation pieces that we'll be talking about today. So obviously you guys have seen, this alignment tool. Basically, the language that we use is our strategy drives our vision through our values towards our mission. And basically it's like, okay, the mission foundational layer to the values, who you uniquely are, to the vision that you're trying to accomplish that's ahead of you, and then what's the strategy and the execution that's on top to be able to fulfill that. But the interesting thing is that obviously it's like we have all these things, and yet how do we fund, or how do we what's the best practices in which we can have financial strategies to be able to help us accomplish our vision? And so that's the topic that we're going to be actually talking about today: financial strategies that help us fund the vision. Okay, so we're going to talk about three different topics, three different strategies around this. And this is not going to be a deep dive into like your bookkeeping finances. So, if you want to talk about those type of things, and Alex or myself, we can definitely talk offline. This is more of a zoomed out version of what an executive leader, as a lead pastor, an executive pastor, needs to be thinking about from a financial strategy perspective. And so we're going to talk about three different categories, three different topics, three different strategies. And so we'll do it. We'll double click on each one of those. But the first one is giving band strategies to be able to engage different donors and different bands. About a year and a half ago, we did a deep dive on Think Tank about donor follow-up and how do you do all those type of things. And so you can definitely refer to that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like how do we grow those giving bands and move people up those ladders. So we'll be talking about that in just a minute. The second is a budget process strategy, budget timelines, best practices around what people allocate towards different budget percentages. And specifically, like a lot of people are actually entering into a budget season and budget time forming time. And so we just want to highlight a little bit about that. And then the last one is reserve strategies. What do you do with cash reserves? How much is enough? What do you do with the net income potentially that you might have at the end of the year? What's best practices around investment strategies? And so all of these things really do help. And again, these are just some things that we have been seeing as we've been engaging with churches around financing and doing deep dives around financial systems assessment, financial health assessment stuff. And these are some common pitfalls and some things that we do see in churches that we just wanted to be a resource today. And hopefully maybe there might be one takeaway from you that you can maybe work with your finance team or just overarching conversations with your board around some of these things. So with all that being said, we're going to talk about the giving band strategy first. So first of all, if you do not know your giving bands, it would be something that we would really encourage you to do a deep dive on your data to be able to do this. Basically, giving bands, the best practice around this is like, look at the last 12 months or look at the calendar year of 2020, 2023, or your last fiscal year, whatever slice of 12 months is, and then be able to say, okay, all right, the first block is, $1 to $100,000 in, that has given in that household for that given year, 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000, 10,000, 10,000, 25, and then $25,000 up. Why this is important is to be able to see where is our donor base from, and how much are they actually funding certain parts of your budget and your organization. When you actually do a deep dive around this and you actually see your data, and it's not very hard to do this data, by the way. So, even if you took an Excel sheet of all the people who gave in that last 12 months by household, and then just sorted them in these kind of categories or these bands, you'll be able to find that out. But this is what we find out. So we'll give you an example of a church that basically we work with, and this is very typical. It's pretty average is what we see for giving bands. So, what's fascinating and interesting when you do a deep dive with your data and you cross-reference these things, you'll find that there's a small percentage in that 25,000, unless you are, the Norman, then we definitely want to talk to you and talk to your extraordinary givers too, by the way. But it's a very small portion of people. At the same time, as you can see in this example, 2% of those givers give to 27% of your budget. This is why when you lose a large high capacity donor, you do have a little bit of an impact, on your budget and those type of things, right? So 2% give 27. Look at the next year. 7% of the givers give 29% of the budget, right? So already you can see that almost 10% make up, a large portion. And then let's go one more tier down. 12% of the givers give to about 21% of the budget. So if we were to just combine those two together, 9%, those top two blocks, make up about 50 to 60% of your budget. And then 21% of your givers give to 77% of your budget. In this case, 70 to 80%. Anybody notice anything around that? What's the principle? Anybody want to say it? The 80-20 principle, right? Like the 80-20 principle literally is at play here, right?
That's what I was going to ask you, Kate,
when we talk about
if I interrupt you real
Yep.
quick. Is this typical? Is this typical what you think guys are going to find?
It's very typical, right? And Alex is the term, the Pareto principle. It's the 80-20 principle, right? So, and so it comes to play. This just in and of itself sometimes has been a light bulb for lead pastors, teaching pastors to be able to say, man, I actually, that's probably something that I want to say to my church, to be able to say, did you know that 20% of the people actually pay for 80% of what we are all benefiting from, right? So all that to say, it's like, this is a very typical slice, but there's so much to learn and grow from all of this information, right? So the last thing that I'll highlight, or I'll mention two things about this, and then I'll ask Alex to chime in. The first one is the very bottom tier, right? So when you think about a tipper, somebody who's giving from $1 to $1,000 in a given year, right? They're basically putting $20 in the bucket, whatever it is, right? These people, it's about half of your givers that are only giving 44% of your budget, right? So it's the largest bucket of people in this tier, and yet at the same time, it's only 4 to 5% of your budget, right? So it's pretty crazy, right? Now, the one last comment that I want to make before I turn it over to or ask Alex for his thoughts and opinions is that this is giving bands for people who have given $1 or more. There is maybe another block under that people don't give a dime to the church. And the reality is that block is actually very big, right? So there's a lot of people that do not give a dime to the church. And so they don't even hit this giving ban. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, too. So Alex, thoughts, perspectives?
Yeah, we'll jump into strategy here, gentlemen. But just Lee touched on this. It's a discipleship piece too. This is like what's underneath the surface at the tip of the iceberg is all the people who just consume on Sunday. And so great strategy to get someone to be part of that 46% givers, about half your congregation, just to give the first time. What we have seen is give them something tangible, an initiative, a campaign, something that says like, okay, my dollars, I'm a tipper. I still think my paycheck is my paycheck, but I'm going to give because the church is going to do this initiative. That's great to get them into that bottom band. And then as they go in their discipleship, it's more of a heart of like, oh, this is God's money, I'm tithing. And it's great to move them up into that percentage giver and ultimately extraordinary giver as they make 80% of all your budget. So yeah, this is to Kay's point, there's a huge portion underneath the surface, and it's a big win if you can give them an initiative to give the first time and then move them up to be a recurring giver.
Yeah, and we're going to
Okay.
talk about some strategies around this, but yeah, go. Questions, Robert. Rob.
A quick question. So, like, for example, at our church, we grew by roughly 15% last year, but our giving only grew by about 5%. So there's like this lag, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit your thoughts on that lag, as people are like, is this my church? Am I going to stay here? You know, and as they learn about generosity and all that. But is that pretty typical to see that kind of lag?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, even when we do projections, Rob, for modeling attendance and then giving as well, we always factor in a lag because it usually does take somebody from 6 months to 12 months to be able to engage in giving in some kind of way. The only outlier in that is that when you attract church people, right? So usually then when you attract church people that go from one church to another, they typically start very, very quickly, in the giving. And so that's just a factor. But other than that, if it's normal church growth with a little bit of mix of transfer growth and a little bit of, just organic growth, unchurched people, all that type of stuff, you will see definitely that lag. Alex, you have any perspective on that?
No, I was going to agree as well. Yeah, there's a spiritual need that people will come to a church and attend before there's that maturity of like, oh, I'm also going to give to my local church, outside if they're coming from a different state or church and they already have that rhythm spiritually to tithe.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and I think somebody was asking the questions. This is for larger churches, smaller churches, for these percentages. Man, we have done some, analytics around large churches, mega churches, and small churches. And it is roughly now there's going to be some ranges around all of these things, right? And maybe even more of like if there's a smaller church, that top category might be pinged a little bit more because there's one or two givers. And so that might affect some of the percentage. But for the large percentage, if you just zoom out and just look at this percentage, the distribution of those things are very, very similar. So all that to say, it's like it's a principle. It's something that we have seen over and over again. Okay,
let me touch on this real quick.
Yeah,
it's a principle that the ladder should look like this, gentlemen, in which it's actually concerning when a church has a large band at the top, because financially on the outside, it's like, oh, their income is great, but that means they're dependent upon a large giving band up top there. If that donor leaves or those set of 5 donors leave, that's usually a red flag that the numbers and percentages are a range, but in general, you want the health of the church is great if it's built like that and it's not inverted where it's like an upside down pyramid. Then it's like, oh shoot, if we lose some key people, our budget is really hurt.
Yeah, okay.
It's a great point.
In the chat, we have 2 questions. Let me throw them at you guys. One was from Kyle. How do you come up with a household baseline metric? Like, how do you create an accurate household count? You want to speak to that first? Yeah, go ahead.
The best is in your geographic region, do simple Google like median income for your area, and the percentage giver is 10% of that average median household income. And so if someone has the tithing principle, they'll be in that middle band, and it's the median income of the households around you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the question, but basically, like from the bands, though, like obviously these are all arbitrary even numbers, right? That we've created in the bands. Whatever your band is, measure that from year over year and see where your growth is. Ultimately, what Alex is saying from the inverted pyramid is that when you have more people, this is the discipleship journey. This is actually an opportunity for us to be able to help build people and help them go up the ladder, right? So, and when you have a large funnel at the bottom, hopefully they'll be able to feed into the other parts. But I will tell you this, like when we started doing this and then we started doing strategies to be able to accomplish this, what actually happens is people do move up the ladder, but then you also get more people on the bottom too. So your percentages change, but they don't change like dramatically because once again, you have more people and it's a healthy growing dynamic.
Hey, Kyle, you asked that question. Did that answer your question or did we miss it?
I was more asking along the lines of like, how do I come up with the number of households in my church unless they're in my database? So I'm like thinking of kids, if I were to go off of like church metrics or some kind of weekend attendance metric, that wouldn't be very accurate. So I just wondered if you guys like a certain way of
Yeah.
creating a baseline.
Your
number of
CMS should do that.
households.
Go ahead, Kay. Yeah, your CMS should do that.
Well,
Go, Kay.
no, not necessarily. When we're talking about the giving bands here, these are the households that have actually given, not your average weekend attendance, right? So in each one of these bands, it's literal information that you have in your data around households that are giving. So, okay. All right. Let me move towards some of the strategies around this, because I think this is where we want to be helpful. So when we're talking about that bottom tier, now, once again, there's some different, at a different time we might talk about, and even in the previous call, we talked about strategies on going from a non-giver to a giver. But let's talk about these people who are tippers or regular givers in some kind of way. But then how do we move them towards that next level? Okay, so one of the things that we have seen as an effective strategy is the reoccurring giving initiatives. So there's one church that I'm working with in Colorado, Peak City Church. Petey Kinder is the pastor there. And what they do is every year from April to May, very strategic timing, they do this reoccurring giving initiative. They call it Heart for the House. It's a giving initiative where basically they're asking to either ask you to start reoccurring giving or increase your monthly reoccurring giving. Okay. So as you can see, 2 action points there. Those 2 action points target the bottom tier, which is actually people who are not, giving on a regular basis. And then the next tier basically is like how they increase their monthly giving towards the next year, right? And so time and time they've done this year over year, and it's been a great onboarding process for getting people to engage in reoccurring giving. Basically, the vision casting around this for the next 4 weeks, they just started it this past week as well. And there's a website there that you can check out and the video to check out there as well, is that they target and they say, you love this place, we've been growing, and, how can you partner with us to help, this continue? And so alongside the mission of what we're trying to accomplish. And so people do that, they come onboarded, and then we're actually taking even these next 3 months after they initiate this gift to be very strategic in adding value and giving them something so that they can continue reoccurring giving in this way. So this has been a very, very popular, and the strategic timing, as you would know, is basically if you can line up reoccurring giving to be able to have a bump in reoccurring giving, then cash flow wise for your summer, usually it's where people's church attendance is a little bit more sporadic, that it's usually a good thing. So this is an example of something to be able to engage that bottom tier. We used to do it at Real Life. We used to call it difference makers. And when you signed up and we did these campaigns, basically you would get a keychain. We would do something special, recognize, and then basically encourage them to be able to do that. Once they get into the system, then we can encourage them to take the next ladder and those type of things. But this is a great way to be able to get that bottom tier to the next tier. Alex.
Yeah, no, great there. The one thing I'll add is if you guys are thinking metrics or numbers in your head, a good standard to go for on how many recurring givers in a church is about 25%. If you can have 25% of your givers be on a recurring donation, that's solid.
Yeah. And so, and we might be all over the place on that. And obviously, the reoccurring givings also depends on the amount and those type of things. But we would love for the best practice around that to be above 25%, right? So, and many of your churches are actually killing that even further. So that's the reoccurring initiatives. That would be that bottom tier to be able to get to the next years. All right. So what's interesting and fascinating about this, though, is when we actually look at this, the way that you would reach and cultivate generosity for the bottom tier to go up is different than the way that you would have strategies to be able to build the top tier. Okay. So for example, it wouldn't be a good idea to be able to have these people at the bottom say, all right, let me restrict my giving. Let me actually give to this fund and this fund and this fund. It's actually a bad habit to be able to teach those people at the bottom tier, because we want them to actually trust the organization or the church to be able to give it and distribute it to the to the appropriate places where they've designated those things too. And so, so that's not something that we would do in the bottom tier. As you can see, the reoccurring giving was towards general fund. We want to teach them and to remind them that they're giving to the mission and to the general fund and towards the larger bucket of things. The top of the tier, these are people who are already giving to the general fund, right? These are people who are already quote unquote tithing, right? And so then what is the strategy around that? These people, one of the things that we have actually seen is restricted giving initiatives. So Alex and Crossing, they've done some great things around this. It was a lot of this actually came from Eastside. They've been doing some things called Legacy, and other people call it different things. So Alex, tell them what you guys do around Accelerate, around high capacity
So we have
donors.
an Accelerate ministry for the past 6 years, and we've seen God just grow it over the years supernaturally. But it's an incredible ministry that we identify people in our congregation. Again, to Case point, they're already tithing, and so we kind of handpick and strategically invite them to a couple things throughout the year, in which this is now we have identified, or they have identified, they have the spiritual gift of generosity and giving. And so we come alongside and they partner with us by we identify projects that are in different buckets that are not in our operational budget, but we give them the opportunity to say like, hey, this is a project we would love to see for our campus or next gen or missions. If you have the gift of generosity and you want to accelerate God's kingdom and impact here, join us. We'll give you the project and fund, and then you can help initiate that. You guys would be pleasantly surprised on when you open this door, your top givers who are already tithing, this is now their offering to the mission and vision of the church.
So these are some of the examples, right? And so as you can see, the buckets of initiative at the very bottom, campus projects, next generation, missions, outreach. Okay, so here's the principle behind this. High capacity donors at the end of the day, what they care about more than anything is ROI, return on investment, right? So when they see something like this, and they see, oh, okay, so we're invited to be a part of this process, and I've got the, the resources that God has blessed us with, and I see a goal of 15,000 and 10,000 has already been raised, 71%. Usually a high capacity donor will look at this and say, 5,000 and that's fully funded. I'll do that, right? So now what actually that does is it actually helps you to not have to budget that in your P&L, in your regular budget things. It frees you for more dollars. And to be frank, sorry to say it this way, but I think many churches, when they don't do things like this, you leave some money on the table for opportunities where people can actually be a part of something like this and fully fund different aspects of ministry. So campus projects, next generation, mission outreach, and those things. So these are just some examples around that. Tell them a little bit about what you guys do on a biannual basis, Alex.
Lee, do you want to chime in? I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah, I was just I'll let you talk to this. I think what I was gonna put in the chat is that some of you may be sort of going, well, this sounds like a large church thing to do. And I want to push back on you feeling that, because I think the concept is scalable. It has nothing to do with the size of the projects or your church budget. It's actually being more intentional around allowing people to be generous in ways that they wouldn't necessarily be on their tithe, and to move your resource ball further down the road. So wherever you are in this scale, you can scale that back and still run the same principles that are there. And just so you know, and then I'll let Alex speak to this, we don't limit who can be part of this Accelerate team. So this is not limited to a certain a certain place on the giving band. If they're on the lower end of the giving band, they're still quite welcome to be part of it, because we believe that if they feel like they've got the gift of generosity, they want to hear about these projects, etc., that's totally great. And so there's no entry point as far as giving levels.
Yeah, no entry point in terms of giving levels, or it's at least entry point of like you have to have X amount of church budget before you can reach this threshold. It's scalable. It's great just practice on if it's a project that you desire as your church operational budget, but you just can't work the numbers because the budget is smaller. Think like, oh, we can maybe open this door to what would be Accelerate type ministry. And so to Kay and Lee's point, our senior pastor once a year from Sunday will kind of give a public announcement of like, hey, we're going to have this breakfast coming up. If you identify with the gift of generosity, please sign up. And so they can opt in. We don't know what their giving band is. So that happens once a year. And then, yeah, we'll have a breakfast to where we'll kind of share the vision, mission, values of Accelerate. And then we'll also have a second time to where we can just celebrate all the projects that were funded and the work that God did.
Yeah, and so with that, the only thing, like some churches do it in that way. Other churches make it more of a behind the scenes type of thing. Like there's nothing public facing around this, and basically it's something that they target towards high capacity. There's multiple ways to do it, right? So ultimately, though, the principle stays and remains the same. And yes, Lee, great point as far as the scalability. Some churches do is they have a dedicated website that's a private website that they send out to different people to say, hey, are you interested in certain things? At a different scale, it might be personal conversations as you encounter and develop relationships with high capacity donors to be able to say, hey, well, we got this project, and what would your thoughts be, in playing a partner in helping us achieve that? Matching funds. There's so many different strategies to be able to accomplish that. Okay, so with this, we're going to keep on moving on. The thing that we do want to mention, because we do see this when we do deep dives in finances, we see a lot of confusion between what's called restricted funds and designated funds. Okay, and this is like IRS important. So this is a really important thing. So Alex, would you explain the difference there?
Yeah, so the simplest way to think about it, gentlemen, is restricted by the donor. So it's coming from the donor's perspective of, hey, I'm going to give this dollar amount to the church, but I am restricting it as the donor of what it has to be used for. A designation is that donation came in as an unrestricted tithe general fund. And then now as a church staff and executives, you guys are designating and earmarking those funds if we want to use them for this purpose.
Yeah. So, and the reason why this is so important is when we actually look at, QuickBooks, things like that, how things are said, we see a lot of language around designated funds when it actually should be restricted funds, meaning you don't get an option or a chance to change that unless you go back to the individual church, get permission, all that type of stuff, right? So be very, very careful in and designated funds. So then what is designated funds? That's a little teaser for the next section here. But restricted funds is what we're talking about when we're talking about these things, and they're dedicated and restricted. Common restricted funds that you probably have experienced maybe in your church's history is building campaigns, right? Like it's dedicated for that. Sometimes the language that you use to describe that maybe is more broader, so you can actually squeeze in other things around that. Two, like missions restricted funds or, certain things that are restricted. Those are good examples of restricted. Designated funds are something completely different. And so don't confuse those terms. We'll talk about designated funds in just a minute. So, okay. Any questions around this?
Just kind of final clarity in case not. What we just talked about, gentlemen, was restricted. What we're going to talk about in a little bit is going to be designated. So
a couple of quick questions for you guys as we're perusing just before we'll just pause for a second. Tony was asking a pretty detailed question. A practical question. P&Ls, I'm a profit and loss. I assume he means I'm way out of my league here. Do restricted have to be there? Do they need to be listed there? Or Tony, you can chime in and clarify your question.
Oh yeah, we got all kinds of fights going on about this right now. So we've shifted it. We've shifted our restricted over to what we call reserve, and it functions on our profit and loss statement, and then it screws up our budget completely.
Yeah, there's definitely things that we'll, probably have to talk offline on this. Do you want to say a bit? Do you want to say a soundbite, Alex, around this before we move on?
It's going to be offline, Tony. So I'll echo that. Restricted is interesting because it can fall in the P&L if you're going to receive and expense all of those funds in the same fiscal year, because then your P&L doesn't get messed up. It's an inflow outflow. But if this is a restricted project over multiple years, it's better on the balance sheet. That's my 30-second snippet. So
there's a lot of nuances around
what are we doing
stuff too. So okay, all right, here we go. Budget process strategies, budget timeline strategies. Okay, so How many people are calendar year for your budget? Hands? Calendar year? Okay. And then how many are fiscal year? Is it the rest of you guys? Okay. And how many don't know what I'm talking about? Right. So okay. So fiscal year basically is determining, like instead of a January to December calendar budget year, you're deciding to do it July through June. That's one of the typical ones that you see in churches as well, or different schedules based upon because you have a school or whatever it might be. So whatever your fiscal year is, because your fiscal year, calendar year is actually your fiscal year. So whatever your fiscal year is, 3 months before your fiscal year. Okay, I'm going to say that again. 3 months, right? Not 3 weeks, not after your calendar year starts, but 3 months before. So if you another way to say this is basically this is the third month if your fiscal year is July, that you would actually review your actuals versus your budget, so you can actually be able to look at where you're at, for the last 3 quarters. Share this with your key staff to be able to prepare their ministry budgets, and then forecast the income projections around that. Month 2, then you receive all those budgets back from your staff or the different people that are representing those budgets, finalize the income and expense budgets, and then compare that to budget percentages and best practices. We'll share that here in the next slide. And then 1 month before your fiscal year, prepare your budget presentation to your board or whoever approves your budget, and then get the budget to the finance team to enter in. What we see is that basically a lot of churches are behind the 8 ball on this. And so then you're actually starting your fiscal year and you're entering that stuff in. And so this is where being a little bit more intentional about that really makes clarity a high value, as well as something that you're going to think you're going to thank your finance team and your staff and everybody to be all on the same page around that. Alex.
Yeah, no, the more you can streamline this, I know this is probably more on like the operational side of things that you guys are familiar with, so we won't belabor this as much. I think what we're going to speak on next can be even more valuable, but we cannot emphasize enough, if you can streamline this 90 days to 120 days out, where your finance team is already setting up the budget meetings and looking at actuals and getting all the approvals, then when July 1 comes, it's a great time to have this conversation, because it is April, to where if you're not having this and you're on the call with the fiscal year July 1, your one takeaway could be going to your staff of like, hey, let's start to talk about the budget, because yeah, it's just unnecessary sideways energy if it's like August and then you're trying to like catch up from July 1.
Yep. And then again, scalability around this. I mean, you probably have volunteers that are part of this process. So it also takes time with their schedules and those things too. So just, time is definitely a value when you're in this process too. Okay. So this is one of the things, and again, you guys will get this in the deck, but the budget percentages of what we see best practices. So they're like, how much should we be spending on staffing? How much should we be spending on mortgage? And when these are out of line, it comes from somewhere, right? And so they're best practices for a reason. So for example, like you might have a mortgage that's way higher than 28% of your actual income. And if that's the case, then you probably have a less of a staff, or you're cheating it somewhere because you have to, right? So so this is where it's like over time, you can't, it's hard to be able to normalize this overnight, but over time, to be able to get closer to those best standards, we have seen it's so much healthier, and you operate in a way better place. So I would just take this, hey, bookkeeper, finance person, whoever you're working with to be able to do these things, say, what's ours? Where are we at? Oh, that's why we feel the pinch that we do, or that's where we could actually, make some tweaks in the next budget year. So this is something that we wanted to share from just a best practice budget percentage place. So any questions, thoughts, Alex, anybody else?
One thing I would add, because I'm part of that process, and maybe some of you want to come in, I don't want to dictate any of this. One of the things I want to encourage you guys to at least think about, maybe you don't do it this way, but when you get into the budgeting process with your ministries, one of the things that we made the shift to a number of years ago, even pre-Alex, was we used to sort of put it out to our ministries to build a budget, and then they would waste a bunch of time doing that, and we'd try to make it a vision casting and do all that. And if you do that, great. The problem we ran into is most of it became irrelevant because the budget didn't shift that much. And so it was really operating. And so we changed to where our person that's leading the budget would meet one-on-one with these ministries, kind of help them make sure that their ministry was still in alignment. If there was anything that was abnormal the year before, how do we make that tweak? And then go from there. We stopped running the exercise that I think we all felt good about, like come in and present what you want in the budget, that really never worked out. And so maybe I'm in the minority, but we just know that our budget doesn't shift that much. So we let our the person building the budget meet individually with the person that's responsible for that budget bucket and make any adjustments necessary each and every year. And it's streamlined it tremendously for us.
Yeah. Now, obviously, Lee, you're talking about an organization that has dialed this in over so many periods.
That's fair.
People like Alex on your team that, and so this is an opportunity to be really clear around that. And yes, obviously, you're going to have to back into some kind of number. You're not just giving them a blank check and say, okay, hey, what are you dreaming? This is why you give them the actuals versus budget for the previous quarter. So that should inform them to be able to help understand what they're budgeting for the next, right? So,
hey, Kay,
Alex, any comments around that?
Joe,
Mm-hmm.
Joe asked a good question. He said 0 to 5% for reserve. Is that yearly?
Yeah,
I think so what Joe was asking. Every year you're setting aside 5%.
Yes. And the reason why it's 0 to even 10%, whatever the number is, basically some churches will basically say, hey, we don't want to spend everything that we bring in. And so because of that, we want to allocate 5% or 10% or 0% of what we bring in to be able to set aside, and you just build it into your budget, right? So that's what that line item is. All right.
And I was going to add to Kyle's thought. I wasn't trying to downplay the vision casting. If you're going to do the vision casting, do it. I just wouldn't do it around budget. I wouldn't do it around whoever casts the best vision, or I would if you still want to do vision presentation, here's where we're going, great. I would just encourage not to build that around who gets the money and how the money is distributed. Just build it around
tension here.
Vision.
Yeah. The tension here as leaders, as executive leaders, you just have to manage this. It's like, how do you get your people and staff to be able to contribute and buy in towards, creating if they're creating calendar, then it should also inform your budget, right, for the next year. So how do you get that? At the same time, obviously, you have some standards, you have some numbers, you have those things. So that's the tension to be able to manage around that. All right, here's the last one, and then we'll open up for Q&A. And this is a really, really good one. We see this over and over again. So we would just love to just kind of double click on this a little bit. So reserve strategies. Some people don't have reserves, and so they don't have a strategy around that. But this is where it's like the strategy helps. You have those things too, right? So with that, I heard somebody sigh. Maybe they don't have any reserves. So with that, basically here is one of the things that we would recommend, right? Reserves. Specifically unrestricted. We talked about unrestricted. We're going to talk about designated in just a minute. Unrestricted reserves, okay? 3 to 6 months of operating expenses. The reason why we actually give this recommendation around this is that we feel like in some sense having too much reserves is also like not being a good steward, and not having enough is not being a good steward. So this is kind of our recommendation. Now, there are outliers, right? Like you might be in a season where, something is at the precipice of something happening because you're going into a building or whatever it might be. Like there's all types of context, right? But we're just saying in a standard recommendation to have at least 3 to 6 months of operating expenses is good and safe, and yet at the same time not being a good steward of basically the money that you've been receiving. Alex.
Yeah, no, I echo that again. I'll maybe go to the next point, Kay, and I can tee off what number 2 is.
Okay.
3 to 6 months of operating expense. It's that health of 8 to 36 weeks, basically, that we think that's a good mark of average. Keep 1 to 2 months in like a checking account that you can have a good flow that's super liquid in your main bank account. Guys, we are in an interest rate environment over the last like
Mhm.
18 months or so that Kay and I are so excited for this part because you can invest in 5% right now, CD, money market, I mean, risk-free that we have not seen as in the past. And so we've seen churches who they'll hold all of their cash reserves in a checking account or a brick and mortar savings account that gets them like 10 basis points of an interest rate, where now it's like, oh, if you have like 60 days of liquid checking account cash, try to invest as much as possible in what's now being offered on like 5% CDs and money market funds. So it could be a huge win if you start thinking in that capacity.
Yeah, we get excited about this because there's so many different ways to do this. Even the 1 to 2 month liquid, it's not that it's like, okay, you just have this, but there's also like crossing and churches, like we've been helping other churches do the CD ladder strategy. You can Google that and figure out, what that is. But basically it's like, it's becoming liquid, every single month because you have so many different ones. FDIC insured, you're only putting a certain amount in different institutions if you care about that. There's a lots of things, but basically it's like, okay, hey, being a good steward of this. Now, there's certain organizations board that says we're not going to, invest in our money. We're not going to, put it in stocks. We're not going to put it in certain stocks. We're not going to, like there's all kinds of things here too, right? So we totally get that and understand that. Like Alex and I, we've been working with one church where basically, and one organization that basically does nonprofit brokerage accounts. Is that right, Alex? Is that the right term?
Yeah.
Nonprofit brokerage accounts. And this organization also, like, if you don't want it in certain types of stocks, or if you don't want it in certain type of investments or whatever, because they understand that churches have some of those values, there's some of those things too. So all that to say, there's so many different ways to be able to do that. All that to say, have a conversation with your board and see where they land around the values around this versus just, assume that basically it's just sitting there and it's for a rainy day.
Okay, would you guys speak to, and I'm asking for your opinion, so everybody, I hope everybody's hearing this last point. Is there, where would be, or Alex, where would be the point on scale where you would say someone should consider, assuming their leadership's on board, beginning to do this revolving? Is there a point where that should kick in, where, if someone's got 100K sitting there in reserves, I would assume at that point you would say some of that should be accessible but being invested.
Point number one. Okay. Once you have 3 to 6 months of operating expenses, if you have less than that, it should be just cash because you're not ready to invest. It's like Dave Ramsey, right? Why are we investing if we don't have enough?
Do we still like Dave?
Emergency.
Do we still like Dave? I don't know if we like Dave.
I don't want to get there. All right, last one, and that is strategic reserves. Start building, and this is where the designated, remember what Alex said about designated. Restricted is donor restricted. Designated is what we choose as a leadership or executive team chooses to be able to designate things towards. Sinking funds, personnel transition funds, expansion funds, okay? What we see in a mature organization around this is that they start creating funds where we know that this building is 30 years old, and we know that, the roof is going to go out in 10 years. And so let's start stocking up, around that so that way it doesn't hit our P&L, or it doesn't randomly like, all right, let's take a bunch of money from our savings. Be very strategic about building these funds, and they can really be helpful for you, and intentional about what you save those money for. Alex.
Yeah, no. And so I saw something in the chat, I believe, Lee. What happens at the end of the year if the church organization finishes in the black? It's a great practice to take that pot and say, like, okay, our student ministry needs a 5K soundboard. That's a capital expense that we're going to do. And then you kind of boil down to like, okay, those are all like it's not going to hit the operational budget. We're going to expense that once. And then you get a designated amount of like, how can we be strategic to start putting a designation and an earmark? Again, these were unrestricted by the donor, but it's you having net income at the end of the year and being strategic on how you want to designate that according to your church and organization, just to earmark those within the church.
And I think I answered
That's
that
good.
question correctly, Alex, that some of those large expenditures we don't typically hit against a ministry budget. We usually pull those out as earmarks against other things.
Again, and this goes back to the importance of a budget timeline. How we become aware of those is when we're in our budget meeting, a ministry will be like, oh yeah, I need a 10K soundboard. And it's like, oh, let's remember that if we finish the year well, and then we'll have this meeting with our elder board and executives of like, hey, we finished the year 100,000, whatever in the black. We need a 10K soundboard that we're going to approve. And then we're going to designate this much to our sinking fund or personnel transition, stuff like that.
Okay.
Hey, real quick,
Yeah.
Yeah,
can
questions,
you,
please.
yeah, we have I know at least a couple other people on the call besides myself are portable, set up, tear down.
Yes.
Would you change based on that? Any of these things?
So that's where maybe potentially like expansion funds could be, so for example, let's say, for example, you were to have some net income at the end of the year and start stocking stuff away around like, what does it look like to be able to, go to a permanent facility? But a lot of that too comes in from a capital campaign. What we see is that obviously when you have seed money to go to the capital campaign, it just makes the decisions a lot easier and better. So yeah, that's what we would say around the expansion funds. So for other people, it'll be multi-campus when they want to go multi-campus, like let's start building some funds around that. The last thing that I'll say around the sinking fund or the building fund or facilities fund is there's things called like reserve studies. I would look into it if your building is on the older side or basically, that there's some maintenance and they come in literally and they do a deep dive on everything. How much time does your roof have? How much time does your carpet have? How much time does your, and they'll do all of that and then put a dollar amount on that. And that helps you inform what you would sock away for sinking fund. So
Kay,
other
before we
questions?
have to wrap up, there was Mike had asked, is it better? And I know that this is probably a deeper question, but to put money in reserves or to pay down debt, what's the balance there? In your guys'
Luke's
opinion,
high-level answer, Mike, is look at the interest rate. If a CD or savings account is offering 5% and your mortgage is at 3%, the arbitrage is to save it. If your mortgage is at 8%, the bigger win is to pay down the debt.
Love it. Cool. We only have a
Others?
few minutes because we want to respect, but yeah, unmute.
I'm
Again,
out.
we're going to include all this.
One more question that Rob, I just saw. Rob, if it was your decision to invest that restricted donation from the donor, like they gave $1 million and then you guys as a church executive team decided to invest it and you're getting interest off of that, I would say the interest is not restricted because it was your decision to make that investment. But if the donor like gave you a stock that you've never liquidated and it's appreciating and then it's more restricted. But just key point, interest that you decided to put in a savings account that was the church's decision, I would see that as unrestricted because that was your decision to put it in the savings account from the restricted donation.
Yeah, I agree. I just have a board member who disagrees with me on that one.
Yeah.
We can talk offline if you want to, but yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good.
This is great. Kay, Alex, slow clap, everybody. Faster clap. I know that some of you guys hung in there. We had about 50 people on the call at one point. I know that for some of you, this is like exactly what you needed. For some of you, maybe you're a little more removed like I am from the day of this, but I think all of this knowledge is helpful, whether it was like a fire hose or some nuggets that you pulled out. Because again, back to the why that Kay and Alex are doing this. We believe, number one, that generosity is a discipleship issue, right? But number two, we believe that the reality of resource being necessary to do what we need to do to further the kingdom of God towards your vision is important. We want to be aware of the strategy, right? While being led of the Spirit. And so this is that aware of the strategy part. We don't want to just in and out and all those sorts of things. So I do want to say that we always say, hey, reach out to us if you got questions, you want to follow up. This may be one of those topics or calls where you really need to do that. Okay. So I'm going to ask Kay and Alex just to drop their emails into the chat real quick while we're on hold. And so you probably have them. It's just first name @growminimumgroup.com. But if you have stuff right? We want to help you guys, right? And so there's some formality that oftentimes we get into relationship with churches on a formal level. With some of you, we have that, but we're here to help. And so if there's quick questions that we can answer or some ways we can help you be, I know these guys would be glad to do it. If you have financial questions, don't send them to me because you're not going to like my answers because I'm just going to forward it to Alex and Kay. So there you go. All right. Hey guys, next month, real quick, we're going to fix that text number. By the way, Kay, the text number was giving everybody an error, but we're going to fix that and we'll send it out in the thing. But also next month on our think tank, we do want to let you know, I forgot to mention it. Steve Cuss, who is going to be part of our October event, is actually going to be our guest on the May call. And so he's going to be dealing with managing leadership anxiety. So again, you'll get all the emails and all that, but that may be a call you want to bookmark. You may want some of your staff. It may end up being a call that we send out that you watch with your team. So we just want to let you know that that's going to be awesome. Okay. Thanks so much, guys, for being here and doing all